Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the latest edition of Avon Book Fest. I'm joined this evening by Katerina Diamond and Nell Pattison, two of Avon's brilliant crime and thriller writers. And we're going to be discussing writing a series versus writing a standalone novel, and of course, answer any questions you have. Please do post them in the Q&A. This is a bit easier to use than the Zoom chat function, and I'll keep an eye out for them so that we answer them. Before we kick off, just a reminder that you can submit your own crime or thriller manuscript to avonbooks.co.uk/submissions. You don't need an agent, just a completed manuscript, and all the guidelines are on our website to help you out. So without further ado, Kat, would you like to start by introducing yourself and your latest book?
Hello, I'm Katerina Diamond. I usually write police procedurals, but I've just finished my first standalone novel, which is called The Heatwave. And that comes out in about 2 weeks or something scary like that. And yes, that's me.
And Nell, same.
Well, I've only got one, so that's quite easy. So yeah, this is The Silent House. It came out in March. Yeah, it's is it a police procedural? It's somewhere between police procedural and thriller. And yeah, so that one's there is another one out in November, but we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, so there you go, that's mine.
Definitely, thank you. So I suppose it kind of relates to your question there, Nell, but I was going to ask you both how you came up with your detective characters. In Kat's case, you've written sort of a long-standing series with DS Imogen Gray and Adrian Miles, and in Nell's case, you have more of a sort of amateur sleuth. So maybe starting with Kat, you could talk us through how you kind of came up with your characters.
Well, originally, when I first started writing The Teacher, which was my first novel, it was going to be a romance novel. And I kind of got to a point where the romance wasn't really doing it for me, and I needed to add some murder. And then after I'd added a lot of murder, I thought, there would be police investigating this horrific amount of murders. So then I created my two police characters. And I did lots of research on what kind of relationship I wanted them to have. And I wanted them originally to have like a very sort of friendly but sort of bantery relationship. So I looked at things like The X-Files, which I think had a fabulous, the Mulder and Scully kind of relationship. And really American cop duos, which we don't really have in our police procedurals. It's like a lone DI and then all the subordinates. So I didn't want that. I wanted to be a bit lower down on the ladder and have two people working on equal footing. And then I created Adrian Miles first, actually, and then I started creating Imogen, and she just sort of took over and became much bigger than I expected her to be as a personality, and then that was it. By the end of the book I was quite attached to them, and I thought I should probably write another one, and then that's it. Now I'm 6 books in with that and hoping to do more.
Definitely. And Nell, how did you come up with Paige Northwood?
Well, so Paige Northwood is a British Sign Language interpreter. And I knew when I started writing The Silent House that I wanted to write a book with the deaf community at the heart of it, because a lot of the time when you read novels that have deaf characters in, the character, and a lot of the time they don't know any other deaf people, and sometimes they fall into a bit of a trope in that they're there to teach the character something, or they're there for a purpose, which is often to lip read something from a grainy CCTV video, which is a real bugbear of mine. And it's not my experience of deafness in the deaf community at all. Whilst it might be an experience for some people, that's not what I've experienced. And so I wanted to reflect a wide deaf community with people who use BSL, people who speak, people who use both, people who have all range of jobs, people from all range of backgrounds. And so that was how Paige had to come into it. Now, originally, she was a deaf journalist. First she was a police officer, but I decided I was too lazy to write a straight police procedural because there was too much research involved. And then After that, she became a deaf journalist, but then I realised she probably couldn't get access to all the information that she needed. And it was a 3 o'clock in the morning epiphany moment where I thought, aha, BSL interpreter, because then she would be outside of the police investigation and be able to kind of do her own thing, not without having that responsibility of being a police officer, but also she would have access to certain parts of the investigation because she would be there in the interviews and she would be there with the suspects and with the victims and kind of becoming part of the investigation in that way. And so that's kind of how she came about.
Yeah, she kind of gives you the layman's point of view as well into what it's like to kind of join a police investigation without being either a suspect or a witness or a member of the police, which is really cool. We've had some questions on the Q&A, so I am going to pull that up. Oh God, what have I done? Here we go. So Kat, which is your favourite of your existing books? And then Nell, do you prefer your first or your second book?
Well, it's so hard to answer that question because I have different feelings about all of them. I was thinking about this recently, and I think it might be The Angel, actually, which seems a bit random, but I did really enjoy the whole prison aspect of it, and I enjoyed looking into writing it. And funnily enough, straight after I wrote it, I got a writing workshop to help inmates to write at Pentonville prison. So I went there, and a couple of the inmates said they were reading it, and I was so embarrassed because I thought, I have no idea what happens inside a prison. I did loads of research, but I did essentially just make it up. And they were like, no, it feels really realistic and that. So I felt quite proud of that. And so I think The Angel might be one of my favourites. Probably, I don't know. I don't know. They're all my favourites for different reasons, but I think that one sort of sticks out in my mind a little bit. So
I guess it's also your third book in the series, isn't it? So it's kind of maybe at the point where you've kind of hit your writing stride and have learned from your first couple as well.
I hope so.
And now, what about you?
Again, it is a very difficult question because the experience of writing your first book is very different from the experience of writing your second. Because the first one, you've got all the time in the world to write, because if you don't have an agent, you don't have a publishing contract, you just write whatever you want to write and then try and make it the best book you can. And so, I mean, I started writing The Silent House in 2016, and it was published this year. And then Silent Night, which is out in November, I started writing that about a year ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And obviously, writing to a deadline and writing, we had to kind of negotiate over the plots and things like that, which again, when you're writing your first one, you just write whatever you feel like. So the experience has been very different. I think there will always be a special place in my house, in my heart, for The Silent House, because it's the first one. But I do think, I hope, you see, now I've said this is going to be jinxing it, but I do think The Silent Night is better. I don't know about what you think, Tilda, but I do think that The Silent Night is a bit better. Better.
I think it's very hard to pick between books. I suppose that's the beauty, is that they share what makes your writing great, but they are different. So it is kind of, really, I can just recommend that people read both of them when they're both out. And that leads me on quite nicely, actually. I was actually curious about how you both felt about this, because it's something that I think can really vary for writers throughout their careers. But how quickly do you tend to write your books, and how much does it vary? Maybe starting with Kat.
So I started writing The Teacher, I think, in 2013, and I started writing it because we moved house and I had no internet, and I'm completely addicted to the internet, and I was even worse back then, if that's even possible. And I had a month with no internet, and I thought, what am I going to do with my brain for that whole month where it's not completely absorbed with other meaningless stuff? And I just started writing The Teacher. In a month I'd written 30,000 words. And then I kind of built on that. And that was my first book. And I'm in the middle of writing my 8th book. So I can't even work that out now. So that was, 6 years, 8 books in 6 years or something. But I sort of, 9 months is my sort of average, I think. I can do it quicker, but it hurts
Sorry.
It's really quite painful. But I find I work better when I'm in a state of complete mental and emotional exhaustion. So I tend to sort of torture myself a little bit and wait till the last minute to do it. Yeah.
All the secrets are coming out. Now, you kind of touched on it already, but how has it been accelerating your writing process the way you've had to?
Well, okay, I'm going to have to kind of clarify what I said in that I wrote The Silent House in 2016. I wrote the first draft in 2016 in 3 months. And then after that, it went through an awful lot of processes with editing and things like that, until I got my agent in 2018. And I've always written fast. Now, before The Silent House existed, I had written lots of other not particularly good sci-fi or fantasy novels, mostly sci-fi. And yeah, I had a lot of comments, feedback from agents about my writing being good and my stories being rubbish. But all of those I wrote really quickly because I started off doing Nanowrimo, which is National Novel Writing Month, which is a challenge to write 50,000 words in November every year. And I started off in 2010, the first time I did it, and that was the year of the really bad snow. I was living in Scotland at the time, and my school where I taught was shut for 2 weeks because it was that bad. And so I wrote 80,000 words of a novel in that month. Now I was single, didn't have any children at the time, so there were fewer other draws on my time. So I think actually I used to write faster than I do now, even though now I have quite a tight deadline. The actual writing of the first draft I think takes me longer now than it would have done back then. But I think as well now I've got a lot more, I think my first draft won't be as rough as it would have been back then as well. I think now that I know a little bit better what I'm doing, I think it takes longer because I'm putting all of my learning into practice as I go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have a question which is, what's your top tip for a budding author? What do you wish you'd been more prepared for? Nell?
Ooh. I don't know. Rejection is part of the game, I would say, and that's something that happens to everybody. And the people you see who, yeah, you will always read stories or hear at writing events about people who wrote a book in a month, went to an agent and gave it to them, and they signed them, and then they had, within another month, they had a 7-way auction for publication, and they ended up with £1 million book deal. You always read stories like that. That doesn't happen to very many people at all, but if it doesn't happen to you, there's nothing wrong with you. That's because that's not the normal experience. It does take time. You play in the long game. Obviously for some people it takes less time than others, but the process of writing and editing and then submitting to agents and waiting and getting rejections and then picking more agents to submit to and getting rejections, and then there's so many more stages of work after that. I think it's just learning to be patient, learning that rejection is always going to be part of the game. Rejection isn't personal, whether it's from an agent or from a publisher. I submitted 3 different books to my agent, Juliet Mushens, and she took me on the 3rd one. So it's not personal. It is purely not this book, thanks. So I suppose that's why. Do
you think you kind of, it sounds like you did, but what do you think you kind of learned from your kind of forays into science fiction before you moved into thriller writing?
Oh, I don't know. I think a lot of that time, I spent a lot of that time kind of going to writing events and learning about the publishing process and what agents do and what publishers do and things like that. So I think by the time I was actually getting to be published myself, I knew what the different roles were and what to expect a bit more than some people might. So I kind of used that time to research that bit. I think I also learned that you need to play to your strengths a little. I with the writing sci-fi, I do read sci-fi. There's a couple of shelves of sci-fi here next to me, and then there's 2 entire floor-to-ceiling bookshelves behind me of crime. So maybe I should have looked on my bookshelves and thought, perhaps you should be writing crime. And as well with adding in deaf characters as well, I think it was when I brought that in because I have a moderate hearing loss myself. I work with deaf children, and I've spent most of my professional life with members of the deaf community in one way or another. And so I think bringing that in helped me to get a bit of a USP in my writing as well, where before I was a bit like, oh no, don't want to play on that, when really that was just a bit silly, because you know I can bring a different angle to things that so far has been very well received. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's great advice for writers, like thinking about what you bring that maybe no one else can bring to your story. Yeah, Kat, what's your kind of top tip for an aspiring writer?
I think the thing that helps me the most is learning not to edit as I go along, and just to get to the end of the first draft, and then after that you can fix it. But you can't fix well, you can fix it, but then you'll just keep agonizing over the same bits over and over again. It's just not worth it. Get to the end, start from the beginning again, and keep going, and do that as many times as you need to. And what do I wish I'd been more prepared for? Editing, particularly copy editing. But I get quite cross when my edits come through. Not the main structural edits, that's all fine. But there's so much editing, and it's sort of, after a while, it starts to feel a bit personal. And you're sort of like, ugh. And I struggle sometimes not to lose my rag. So sometimes I don't even open my edits for a few days because I'm cross that I've even got any, but they always make it better. Always. So
for anyone watching who's wondering, I'm Kat's editor at the moment, so so she had to say that last part.
They do after you've got through that bit of pain, it's like, oh yeah, that makes much more sense. But you kind of, no one hands a book in and then gets it back going, yeah, that's amazing, let's just print it. No one. And if they do, someone's lying to them.
There's something wrong there, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly.
I would agree that whenever I read a book and think, oh, like really just a few things, and then it all comes out. Like, I think most editors can't resist that. They could always polish something that's really polished from the writer's end, which is, I can imagine, very frustrating.
See, I'm the opposite with edits, and the structural edits are the ones I dread the most. And then by the time we get to line edits, I'm kind of all right, because that's more guided for me. And a lot of the time I'm just going, yeah, tell them whatever. I'll just do what you say.
I don't mind the line edits, it's the copy edits, the bit after that. It feels really like personal, and I want to write in all the comments something really mean back to the copy editor, and I have to like stop myself. And I know it's not her fault or his fault. It's just, by that point, I'm just like, can we not just sell this now, please?
Yeah, I've just finished my copy edits for Silent Night, and I think half of them were me italicizing the wrong bits, because all the sign language is mine is in italics as opposed to speech marks to distinguish between. And I just am terrible, obviously. It's had terrible aim with highlighting things and italicizing them, because there's so many bits, no, that shouldn't be.
I should clarify for anyone listening who doesn't know what a copy editor does. It is, so I'll just say it in brief, but we do a structural edit, which is sort of, it seems to vary between authors how much they enjoy that stage, but it's the kind of developmental, the storyline, the characters, like potentially quite big changes. Line editing is kind of going through it with track changes in Word, and your editor will suggest lots of things and kind of pick up smaller stuff, like tends to be kind of where you pick out plot holes or anything that sort of didn't get followed through to the end of the book, and any kind of suggestions on language. And then the copy editor is the kind of grammar expert who comes in and checks all the grammar and knows things that I would never know, and also is the fresh pair of eyes who hasn't seen it before, who can say, oh, what happened, like why has that character got that name, and then you realise that you forgot because you changed their name at some point earlier in the process. Nell, not to call you out.
I think that's none of your business. That was going through my head at that time.
This is all very illuminating. Oh, I've just seen we've got another question, which is, Nell, did Juliet ask you to come back to her once you'd written a new book, or were you just determined that she was the agent that you wanted to represent you, and is that why you continued submitting?
The latter. I knew she was a very good agent. I did submit to other agents as well, because, you know, when you submit it to agents, sometimes it can take a long time for them to get back to you. So, you know, if you're just doing one at a time, then it can be a very long process. But yes, I'd sent 2 to her, and then, I mean, these were quite a long time ago. I think it was like 2013, 2014, that I'd submitted a couple to her, and then this one I sent her in. I submitted to her in 2017, and then sometime early 2018, I think she wrote back and said, I'm not quite sure about this as it is, but I think it's got a lot of potential. So she gave me what's called the revise and resubmit, which is where she made various suggestions for what could change and what needed to change to improve it, and then asked me to go back and do that, and then to resubmit it. And obviously, if an agent does that, they fully intend that if you make these changes and make it as good as they've got it in their head, then they'll take you on. And I did, and she liked it, and she did. So, you know, that's how that went.
And we've got another question actually, which I think we kind of covered on Nell's side, but for Kat maybe, have you ever thought about or tried your hand at writing other genres? Well, romance.
Yeah, that didn't work out. I killed a lot of people when I tried romance. I don't know, I would like to do sci-fi. I watch a lot of sci-fi, and an anagram of my name, Katerina Diamond, is Nikita Andromeda, which I think really lends itself to sci-fi. But then also can't be asked, so I feel like I'm going to stick with crime. And I've got so many crime book ideas that I feel like by the time I get to writing sci-fi, I will, well, it would be years away. I've got so many different books in my head that I want to sort of get to eventually. And then by the time I get to them, I don't want to write them anymore. So that's just the way that goes.
Actually, that brings us on nicely to another question we've just been asked, which is where do you get the inspiration for your plots, especially the twists, from? So, Kat, do you want to talk us through that?
So I watch a lot of telly, like a ridiculous amount of television. I've currently just found a TV show on Prime that I used to watch when I was about 16, and it's about the Australian Police Rescue Force. So I've been watching that all day today, and it's already given me like 3 or 4 ideas about what I can do to my characters. I mean, with my characters. Yeah, it's just, I just watch stories and how stories work. I just and I watch a lot of police stuff as well. I think it's just things that impact me when I'm watching something and either shock me or upset me. I want to do that in my books. So obviously it won't be completely pulled from whatever I'm watching, but I'll think about ways I can achieve that moment within my characters, if you know what I mean. And that's where most of my, I think once you have characters in mind, then everything you watch or read or do kind of informs what's going to happen to them, because you're always plotting all the time when you're awake, sometimes when you're asleep as well. So it just, once you've got those characters, you're just constantly thinking about ways to challenge them, I think.
Yeah, actually, and that made me think as well, obviously, as you said, you watched a lot of police related drama, and your first 6 books were all in a police procedural series, but your new book, The Heatwave, is your first standalone psychological thriller. What did it feel like, kind of leaving the kind of structure of having a police procedural narrative and moving into something a bit more freeform?
Yeah, it was horrible. I hated every minute of it. It was really hard because with a police procedural, you have procedures, so you can kind of, there is a slight structure to it, although you have to think of what the crime is and that. The police response to the crime will always naturally be a certain way because they have procedures to go through. Not that I go into that too much, because I don't like police books that are too heavy on the technical jargon. Personally, as a viewer or a reader, I don't like that when it's too technical. I think the story should override that side of things. So it's a sort of balancing act between getting the things right and not being too technical, that it's actually quite boring. But back to my standalone psychological thriller, I just found it so hard, as you well know, Tilda, because you had to edit it quite heavily, that I just didn't know what happened next. I mean, I knew the broader strokes of the story, but to get from one bit to the next was quite a struggle for me. Also because with my police procedurals, I usually have several yarns going on at once that all feed into one final sort of climax, and it's also quite non-linear. So my first draft, as you know, the Heatwave was one linear story from one point of view, and that wasn't really working. So we added the extra one in, which made it stronger, even though I was in a lot of pain while writing it.
I promise it was worth it.
Yes, it was worth it, but it was. I'm not going to lie. I struggled with it quite a bit, but we got there in the end.
I mean, I'm trying to work out what I can say without sort of spoiling any aspects of your book, because it is just so, like, everything about it is so unexpected. But I guess all I would say is I think it is particularly impressive that as you changed the book, you came up with so many new twists and turns and ideas. Like, it just evolved so much, with sort of everything that you changed kind of had a knock-on effect, which I can imagine is not easy to then handle. But yeah, when people get their hands on it, just know that a lot of it kind of it just evolved and changed the whole time, and some of what you introduced is just, I can't really imagine it without it anymore.
Exactly. Same. I think it was always meant to be this book. I just couldn't see it when I started writing it. However long ago that was, I can't remember. 10 years, but it wasn't.
Nell, where do you get your sort of plot and twist inspiration from?
For plots, I tend to start with kind of a what if question. I think with the Silent House, certainly it was a, what if a deaf family woke up one morning and discovered there'd been a murder in the house in the middle of the night, and of course they'd all slept through it, which obviously is a pretty horrifying situation. And then I built on it from there. And what I tend to do is, once I've got my what if and work out my crime, then I skip to the end and decide who did it and why, and then I kind of fill in the gaps of plot in between. For twists and things, I don't really know where they come from. I've never really thought about it. I think it's just one of those things that sometimes you're following through a plot idea and you think, but what if this happened instead? I don't think I can really pin down where it comes from or at what point in the thought process I think of something, because I don't really identify anything as being a twist or anything like that. I just have things that happen. So sorry, it's a bit unscientific.
You tend to sort of have it nailed down before you start writing your draft. Are you sort of a plotter rather than a pantser?
Oh yes, I have a thorough plot. I'm writing the third one at the moment, and obviously we had an outline that we discussed, and it was a fairly decent outline, and I thought, it's all right, I could just write from that without breaking it down more into chapter by chapter plot. And I completely failed at writing that. So now I've gone back and I have broken it down. I have every single chapter plotted out. And yes, some chapters might change and be moved around and altered and stuff as I'm writing it, but I have my fairly solid structure of it already, and that makes it a lot easier for me to write. But that's the way I've always done it, so it's what works for me.
I'm guessing from Kat, from your reaction, that you don't do it that way.
No, you may be surprised to hear that I do not do it that way. I think you start with a twist and think about who that could possibly happen to, and then I write a whole story around that. That was how the Heatwave kind of came about. I sort of thought, oh, what if this was a thing? And then had to find a way of making that the thing. And similar with the one I'm writing now. And in terms of plotting, I've really been trying really hard to learn how to plot, and I'm kind of there, but it's very loose and very not what other people do, and it just, I'm a bit more, if I've written down too clean a synopsis, I feel like I've already written the book, so I don't want to write the book. So I need sort of a little bit of sort of, I could write sort of 30 points that I, in order of where I want the book to go, but to break each chapter down, no.
I think you need to do what works. Everyone does it differently, don't they? And I think once you've found the way that works for you, that's the more important thing, isn't it?
One of the things I found is that every single book is different, the way I approach it. So for The Angel, my synopsis was so different, as Phoebe Morgan, who was my editor at the time, will tell you. It was nothing like the end book. There was a prison in it. That was it. That was the only similarity. And then The Promise was, I'd originally written part of that sort of 20 years ago when my son was born, as a screenplay for this film idea that I had. And I liked the story so much, but I never really finished it properly. But I then converted that into part of The Promise. So each one, and then Truth or Die, I can't even remember what that's about. And Woman in the Water, I knew exactly the big thing that I wanted to happen, and I tried to build around how I would make that thing happen. Mm-hmm. For anyone who's read it, they'll know what I'm talking about. For anyone who hasn't, yeah, you don't know what I'm talking about. So, but I think every book is different, basically.
Yeah, I mean, from my experience as well, like everyone works so differently on. It's interesting that your process changes so much, Kat. But yeah, I've definitely seen sort of all bits of the spectrum in terms of working out how much of it you know and ahead of time, and how much your characters can surprise you as you go. But I'm sure aspiring writers will find it reassuring that there isn't a kind of a right or a wrong way to go about it. So someone's asked the question, do you ever suffer from writer's block? And if so, do you have any tips for how to get through it? Should we start with you, Nell?
I don't think I have writer's block. I think I have writer's procrastination, writer's laziness, writers generally willing to do pretty much anything other than write. But I don't think it's ever necessarily writer's block, because when I actually force myself to sit down and do it, then I normally can. If I do find that I'm in a bit where I can't get the words out and I just can't write that bit, I sit back and think, well, why not? What's wrong with it? Then for me, when that happens, there must be something wrong with that scene that I'm working on. It might be in the wrong place. It might be that it doesn't need to happen at all. It means that it's happening in the wrong order, the wrong thing's happening in that scene, or it's not happening to the right person, something like that. So I don't think I necessarily get writer's block. I get a lot of times where I am really reluctant to actually sit down and write. Which is usually with the first draft, and is usually because the book you have in your head is this perfect, wonderful thing, and you know that as soon as you start splurging words onto the page, it will become the worst thing anybody has ever written in the world. Well, that's how it works for me anyway, and I know that a lot of writers have similar issues. Certainly by the time you get to about a third to a half of the way through, I think. So yeah, I think if you have massive writer's block with something, then you need to work out what that problem is with that thing you're trying to write. Why is it that that's blocking you? Could you write something else? Yeah, if it's something that you don't feel like you write anything, that's not something I've necessarily had experience with, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to give advice on that, and I wouldn't want to give advice really, because I'd just be spouting nonsense.
Fair enough. Kat, what about you? Have you ever had any writer's block?
Yeah, quite a few times really. There's sort of different types, I think. One is where you just don't want to write at all ever, and you hate writing and you hate yourself, that kind of thing. There's the other where you're struggling or stuck with a bit of the story. And so I've got several ways of tackling writer's block. one is to just watch an incessant amount of television to the point where I'm not really sleeping, because so this last 2 weeks I've watched, I think, 6 seasons of Vikings and 4 seasons of The Last Kingdom. So it's a real heavy Viking vibe going on with me at the moment.
Yeah.
And I've been going to bed at like 4 in the morning and getting up at 6. But when I do that, my brain kind of switches into this weird state where it gets quite creative. I think because I'm possibly hallucinating or on some kind of like ulterior plane. I don't know. But I when I've got a deadline, I deliberately get myself into that state because I find it really hard to write otherwise. I also always have the television on when I'm writing. And I watch films, TV, whatever. I can't write in silence because I just leave. I have to have something like a 45-minute TV show. I will have that on, and that means I will sit in front of the computer for 45 minutes. Otherwise, I will literally just leave. I'll just go somewhere else to do something else. And the other way I tackle writer's block, which is probably a little less crazy, is that if I've put something down for a while and not touched it, and then I'm coming back to it and I need to pick it up, I will just read it again. And then when I get to the end of it, I'll start at the beginning again, and I'll just keep reading it. And at some point, I'll start getting quite critical of it, rather than completely apathetic, which is where I start. And so when I start getting critical, I'll start making little notes, and then suddenly it's like, oh yes, this needs to happen next, or whatever. That's the problem of the pantser, I think. Someone who doesn't plot is like, what happens next, you know? So those are my 2 very different ways. One probably a bit more sensible than the other.
I mean, between the 2 of you, that's some great advice, though. I think user caution advised over the watching TV until you virtually black out option. I'm very intrigued it works. Sorry, go on.
With the noise as well. I have to have complete silence. I take my hearing aids out when I write. Yeah, I'm just completely, but you know, I think that's another example of you just have to do what works for you, don't you? And every single writer's different, and there's no one way that works. I mean, people who kind of say, oh, rules for writing. No, there's no rules other than actually writing something at some point in your life, you know? Yeah.
We've got another question come through, which is, which other authors inspire you? Kat?
I'm inspired by different authors for different reasons. Some because of the amount of work that they put out and the quality of work that they put out. I'm really inspired by that. And I'm quite inspired by historical fiction because I think that's the one thing I could never ever write. I just don't have the let's be honest, I don't have the focus required to do that one. But I like Phoebe Morgan. She's a great writer, and her new book's out now, isn't it? Or is it The Babysitter?
Yeah, The Babysitter's just come out.
Yes, I have read it. It was very good. I don't know how Phoebe does it. She does editing, and because no
one knows how she does it. If anyone watching who doesn't know, Phoebe is one of the editors at Avon, and she writes her own books, and I don't know where she finds the time.
Exactly. And she does other stuff too, so yeah. That's really annoying, Phoebe. And who else do I really like? I like Will Dean's books, the one set in the Norwegian forest. I think it's Norway, or is it Sweden? It's Scandinavia. Who else do I like? Angela Clark, who used to be an Avon author. I really enjoyed her books. And she works very hard as well. It's hard to say, really. When I first started writing, I think one of the authors that made me realise I could maybe be a writer was Karen Slaughter. So I probably read a lot of quite highbrow stuff before I picked up my first Karen Slaughter book. And I read it and I was like, why have I been reading this other stuff when crime fiction is a thing? That's really cool. So I read, and it was so dark, and I thought, oh, am I allowed to write things like this? And is this acceptable? And I think that inspired me to sort of go down the road of writing. But I'm mostly impressed by anyone who writes a book, actually, because it's hard it's not hard. It's like a very nice job, but it's also quite hard. So
I can definitely see the Karen Sorter thing. I remember reading my first Karen Sorter and just being so shocked, but I couldn't look away.
exactly, and that's what I tried to write. It's really dark, horrible, shocking, horrible things that people can't, like car crash writing, I think, where you're just
You
like,
just can't stop
I
reading.
just need to know what happens. Yeah. So
Nell, what about you?
I mean, some of the big name crime writers that I've read a lot of would be people like Val McDermott and Jeffrey Deaver. When I get a new Jeffrey Deaver novel, I do need like a weekend just without any interruptions, because I know that I will not be able to put it down. And that's the sort of thing I would love to aspire to in my own writing. I do like Callie Taylor's, of course, other Avon author. Sorry, C.L. Taylor, she is for Avon, isn't she? back in time, she was there. And I'm just thinking, I was having a look at my shelves actually. I like some of the people who are doing slightly different things. Like I really like Matt Wesolowski's 6 Stories series. I apologise if I've pronounced his name incorrectly. But it's written as a podcast, and each it's done in kind of 6 different sections with a different person in focus, and they're brilliant. I think the way he's written them, they're fantastic. I really enjoyed The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle as well, which is very much playing with the genre. I think it's kind of Quantum Leap meets Agatha Christie, isn't it? That's how it's often described. So yeah, I don't know. I do like the people who are some of the big names, and who have they're the big names now, but they got there by just plodding away and plugging away and writing and they have huge backlists now, but it's a long time that it's taken them to get there. Absolutely, I look up to them. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of newer things and people playing with the genre that I admire as well.
And we've got another question, which is, I'm loving these online festivals, but once we can go out and about again, do you have any recommendations of festivals to attend as a crime author who's just starting out? Kat, do you want to start?
I think the one I like the most is probably Harrogate Festival as a crime writer. It's very accessible, I think, for people to just chat to other people, and most crime writers I know are quite approachable and friendly and not weird at all. True, they're like the least weird people I've ever met, although maybe not everyone thinks that. Maybe like me. Bloody Scotland is a fantastic festival in Stirling in Scotland. That's really lovely. Nice atmosphere again. It's a bit more spread out than the Harrogate Festival, but I still quite enjoyed it. It's just nice being in Scotland, really. I'm trying to convince my husband to move there, but he's not having it. And Crime Fest is good. I think that's the first sort of big one of the year usually. But Bristol's a bit of a busy place, I think. So, but it's nice way to kick off the festival thing. But I think Harrogate, if you were going to only do one, then Harrogate would be the one I would pick.
And
I'd
now,
agree with that.
I don't know how many you've been to, because obviously Nell had a lot of festival things planned for this year, but of course, because of the circumstances, hopefully it will be next year. But did you attend lots of festivals before?
I've been to quite a few that are not necessarily crime ones, and I think that's important to have a look at those as well, because I think you can learn a lot from all writing type festivals, even if they're not crime ones. I definitely second what Kat said about Harrogate. I've been there a couple of times, and if you're in the process of writing, then the Creative Thursday at Harrogate can be really good. The year I was on that, Sarah Hillary and Alex Marwood were doing one of the sessions. And yeah, they were just brilliant and very inspiring. And I think it was actually around that time that I was kind of getting my head around the plot for The Silent House. So obviously the plot's changed quite a bit between then and now, but yeah, I think as well there are smaller, more local crime festivals. Like there's Hull Noir, which has happened once before. It was supposed to be happening again this year, but they've postponed to hopefully March next year. There's one in Morecambe and Vice. I love the names that people come up with for festivals. So hopefully that one will happen again. I think that was supposed to happen in September, but obviously nothing's happening at the moment. So yeah, little ones, local ones are always worth looking at. And
last year, did you go to Capital Crime?
London's always a bit of a, I was going to say a real word there, a pain to get to for me living in the wilds of Lincolnshire. But certainly, yeah, there's a few that go on in London as well. And the Killer Women one as well in London, definitely worth looking at. So yeah, I think it depends where you are. For writing things, Jericho Writers do a good writing weekend, which I went to several times, and it was there I actually met Juliet for the first time years ago, and that is always a good one, and that's good for learning about all sorts of things. So it's good for learning about the writing process, learning about what publishing is, what happens in publishing houses, what agents do. They always have a bit about self-publishing if that's the route you want to go down. And then there's various different writing workshops you can choose from as well. So that's always a good one. And they're doing a summer festival online. I know that. So yeah, I think there's lots of things around if you have a look, if you have a delve on the internet.
That's all really good advice. Got another question, which is, if you weren't an author, what would you be? Kat?
Well, before I was an author, I didn't really do much, to be honest. I just looked after my children. I think I was pretty much unemployable. I have no skills whatsoever. So I'm quite lucky that writing has worked out for me, because that was all I've ever really done. My mum said to me the other day, "Oh, you'd make a good makeup artist," and I thought, I'll stick with writing books, thanks. So that was that. Yeah, I'm just not very good at stuff. I'm quite amazed that I finished writing a book, and now I've finished writing 7 books. So obviously this was the right path for me. But perseverance, you get there in the end, if that's what you're really meant to do, meant to be. I can't imagine doing anything else now, except nothing would be the other job that I do. Sorry for that rubbish answer.
No, I think it's a good one. Now, obviously you already have obviously a job alongside your writing, but do you want to expand?
I am a teacher of the deaf, and I have been for about 14 years now, obviously since I was 10. And so I've worked in schools for the deaf and schools with units to support deaf children for quite some time, and that's what I do now part-time. Although I'm part-time because I've just gone back off maternity leave, rather than part-time because, writing's showering money on me from the sky. We all wish it would, but it's a slow process. But yeah, I think if I hadn't started writing, I don't think I probably would have changed career. I think I would have continued, and probably would continue for a while. So yeah, that's me. Sorry, it's a little bit dull, but
I was going to ask, does it fit well around, obviously when you're working full time, does it fit well around your writing? Like, how do you manage those two things?
Well, that's a tricky one to answer, because last time I was working full time, I didn't have a toddler. And so when when I was working full time, if I had no children, then it was easy enough, because evenings and weekends, and school holidays, can always find plenty of time to write. It is more difficult now. Certainly if I were working full-time now, it would be quite tricky. I think a lot of my writing is done in the 2-hour period when my son has an afternoon nap now. So I think it's just, it's one of those that if you want to do it, then there will be ways to fit it around your situation. It just might mean a few sacrifices.
Yeah. And then we have another question, which is, who would play your characters in a Netflix adaptation? Nell, do you want to go first?
Oh, don't ask me questions like that.
Sorry, I didn't leave you any thinking time at all.
I think if there were to be a Netflix adaptation and it was set in the UK, I think I would have to involve both of the deaf actresses who were narrators for the audiobook. So that's Claire Louise English and Lara Stewart. So I think they would definitely feature there. Although of course Paige herself isn't deaf. Oh, that's a really tough question for me. I don't watch enough things to know who anybody is. I don't know enough actors and actresses' names. Oh, that's a really tricky one. I don't know. I'm sorry. Rubbish.
Kat, what about you? Is it going to be someone from Vikings?
Funny you should say that. I often run competitions on my Facebook page for people to win books, and they have to tell me who would play my main characters with photos, because I've never been able to decide. It's too hard, because my characters are not real. They're like real in here. So to actually put someone a face to it would be really hard. But I've been watching Vikings a lot lately, and I quite like George Blagden for Adrian. So he's a very good actor. Yeah, he played King Louis XIV in Versailles as well. He's very good. I like him. But and Imogen is just too difficult, I think. The last person who won my competition suggested Olympia Valance, who is an Australian actress. She's Holly Valance's sister, so
I know Holly.
Kind of like the right age, and she's got long dark hair and looks a bit sort of Greek. So that was the main criteria. Yeah, it's really hard. It's a really hard question, that. So my current choice for Adrian, and it changes almost daily, is George Blagden. So there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've worked with writers before who've had kind of mood boards, and they really like sort of seeing a kind of like a version of the character while they write. So it's kind of like the opposite approach, like you prefer not to put a face on them.
Yeah, I do actually. When I wrote The Teacher, because I had so many characters in there, I ended up printing off loads of pictures of actors and stuff and sticking them all over my walls, because I couldn't keep track of everyone, even though I killed most of them in the end, you know. But I still needed that little bit of a marker for like, oh, this is this guy, this is that guy. But I've never been able to put up a picture of Imogen and Adrian. Everyone else gets a face, but they are still faceless.
I'm kind of picturing this as the world's creepiest character sheet where they're all crossed out by the end.
We were crossed out.
See, I don't know what my characters look like at all. This is the editing comments I've had from yourself about, oh, it'd be good to have a description of Paige here, or good to have a description of this character. I dread those because I have no idea what they look like, and so I need to keep like a list of things where I've described them. And I'm so glad that in the copy editor we just done for Silent Night, the copy editor did that. You know, she made a list of where I've described people and how I've described them, which is brilliant, because I need that myself, because I forget, you know.
It's funny actually, because
I just don't see them. I'm just not a visual thinker at all. You know, and I feel like, when I'm reading other people's books, if there's a part that's very heavy on the description, I find it really difficult, because it just, unless I've seen a picture of it, I can't really build that picture in my mind. I'm all words, me.
I was going to say, because some authors I know like deliberately don't like to describe a character because they want the reader to be able to just picture whoever they want. So yeah, sorry I was draconian with you on that one. Oh, okay, we got another good one. If you had to pick a favourite book, either from your childhood or more recently, what would it be? Anything come to mind for either of you?
Rebecca's probably one of my favourite books.
Oh yeah.
And I recently made my daughter read it. She's 14 and she's quite woke. So she was a little bit horrified by the whole romantic relationship. because I said I really loved the male character in it, Maxim de Winter, and she's like, why? He is horrible. He's so horrible. He's creepy. And I'm like, yeah, I still like him, you know. So I love it. It's just so brilliantly written, so suspenseful, and it's one of the books that I can read again and again. And I love the film as well with Olivier, and they're making a remake with Armie Hammer, who's one of my favourite actors as well. So I'm really looking forward to that. So yeah, Rebecca would be it for me.
Yeah, I'd love to watch that actually. I've not seen the old film of Rebecca, and I think I've only read it once or maybe twice. I've sort of almost like, it's one of those classics that I sort of save because you think you know that rereading it will be so satisfying.
I really recommend the Olivier version. It is
Okay.
It's really good. Yeah.
I'll add it to I've made a list of films to watch during lockdown, so it's growing every day, so it can go on the list. Nell, what about you?
Oh, I don't know. That's a tricky one, because again, I have a shocking memory, and so I can read books again and again, because I never remember what happens. So I mean, I've always loved Agatha Christie's, and I think when I was about 9 or 10, when I'd exhausted the children's section of our local library, which was half of a porter cabin on the village green and the other half was the doctor's surgery. So yeah, when I'd read my way through the children's section, and the librarian had ordered in every single Nancy Drew in existence for me, I think that was when she put me onto Agatha Christie. I really should have realised I was going to be a crime writer, shouldn't I? So yeah, I mean, there are some very good Agatha Christie's that I do like. The Pale Horse is one that I have always liked, and on recommendation I have not watched the recent adaptation. Yeah, Kat's shaking her head. I was told, if you love the book, do not watch it. So I have not watched the recent adaptation, and I'm quite happy with my life as it is without watching it. Yeah, so I do love that one. The Moving Finger, that's a good one as well. But yeah, there's some great Agatha Christie. I have all but one, and I've got a few first editions as well that my husband keeps kind of slotting in there every Christmas. So yeah, those are probably my favourites. So without picking a specific one, I would say many of those.
I mean, I thought I'd read a lot of Agatha Christie, but those are two I haven't read, so got to go on the list.
I've read a lot of Agatha Christie books. I was obsessed, particularly Poirot, but I have read all of them. I love them. I've got them. They're on the top shelves up there. That's just all Agatha Christie up there. So.
I stole mine from my grandparents, who had them in the attic in a sort of cupboard, and I was so frightened of that cupboard because it was all the old covers with quite like not actually graphic, but for a kind of 10-year-old it was like the foot on the chandelier and stuff, and I was really scared, so I read them all to sort of get over being scared. But I've clearly missed a couple of key ones for my Agatha Christie education. It looks like we've only got a couple more minutes, so we've had another question which we haven't got to yet, which was, what's it been like writing and publishing during lockdown? Kat, do you want to go first?
So I've got a book coming out in a couple of weeks, and that feels a bit surreal because normally, I don't know, I don't actually go out much anyway. I'm a bit of a recluse and a hermit. The main problem with lockdown so far has been that everyone else is in the house with me, because normally I'm here anyway. But it's been okay. I've struggled to focus quite a lot. I'm sort of getting there a bit more now, and just trying to, because I've got 2 kids and my son's girlfriend moved in as well, because otherwise I didn't want them to be apart and then pining for each other. That would have just been really annoying. So I thought, just move in, it will be easier. They're both 20 and doing a degree at the moment, and my daughter's just about to do her GCSE. So there's just been a lot on our minds, I think. So writing has sort of been hard to focus on. But I've done loads of plotting and writing related things, but the actual creative writing of words has been a struggle.
And what about you, Nell?
I think the publication side of things, it has been, obviously it's been a bit of a letdown in the fact that I was supposed to be at all these events. I've got a big wall planner on the wall here that's got all these events on it that I should have been doing, starting off in March. I think I had 2 in March, I had 2 in April, 1 in May, 3 in June. So obviously we should have been a crime fest right now. And in a couple of weeks I was supposed to do 1 in Middlesbrough on a Friday night, and then Hull the next morning, which would have been fun. But yeah, I was totally happy to do it. And yeah, all of these things that I should have been going to as a debut author, and you know, I'll never get that chance to be a debut author again. You know, by the time these are coming round next year, I'll have 2 or even 3 books out, which will be great. But I kind of feel almost like I've missed out on experience there, which obviously isn't to take away from the seriousness of the situation. Obviously, I understand that far worse things have happened to many people in the last few months. But you know, that has been a little bit of a disappointment to me. I am just glad that I got my launch party, because my book was out at the start of March, so I did manage to get a launch and an event, a bookshop event in just before we were all locked down.
Yeah.
The actual writing side of things actually hasn't been that difficult for me. Obviously my husband and I are both working from home, so on a Monday and Tuesday it's a bit of a juggle, obviously having a 15-month-old and both trying to work from home. But we've got a fairly good routine in, and then the other 3 days of the week when I'm not doing my teaching, then I'm basically in a very similar routine to how I would have been. My husband's working in the office and I'm writing when the wee man has a nap, so it's not massively different for me. Thankfully I have been quite lucky in that regard. I think there've been times when, you know, everything's been so strange, it's made it a bit more difficult to write and get things done. But apart from that, it's yeah, I think I've been quite lucky in that regard.
Yeah. Well, that's all we've got time for today. So thank you both so much for giving your time. It's been brilliant. The only thing that I meant to say before we wrap up is just that we've been recording this. So we've had a request just asking if it will be available, and the answer is yes. It will be on the Avon YouTube channel from, I think, next week. So anyone who's missed this or wants to share a link with someone else, that will be possible. And yeah, thank you both so much. It's been brilliant to chat. I hope everyone watching has really enjoyed it and learned something useful, particularly if they're kind of hoping to write their own book and submit to Avon. And in the meantime, have lovely weekends. And I think that's it from us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.